समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
We live in a very unstable world right now where the biggest power conducts its diplomacy with these semi-disjointed posts devoid of any diplomatic nuance. So he put out one post saying unconditional surrender, another one in which he actually hinted at assassinating, the possibility of the assassination of Khamenei. Please see this post on your screen, I will not read it, saying that we know where he is, right, where he's located, but we will not take him out now. And then to make sure that you don't get confused by the meaning of taking him out, I think I read it someplace, not my smart line, someone else's, that he wanted to make sure that nobody will confuse this to mean that he's taking out Khamenei on a dinner date. He says, kill, right? And then he says, at least not for now. So that is hinting at an assassination, at assassinating the head of a large state, and also the head of a very large religious group, because Khamenei is not just the supreme leader of Iran, he is also seen as the spiritual leader by Muslims by and large, but by Shias in particular. And Shia is not a small community. Iraq is majority Shia, Azerbaijan is majority Shia, many other countries have large Shia populations, including India. Pakistan, of course, but including India. Even think of assassinating, even to discuss or throw up the idea of assassinating the head of a state of 9.5 crore people, and also such a supreme religious leader, powerful religious leader, is reckless and also caused a great deal of consternation. Now, two things. Assassinating somebody, given how many people have been assassinated in Iran already, key people, generals, their successor, intelligence people, scientists. Assassinating in Iran right now, particularly for the Israelis, is not that difficult because they have their intelligence people all over. However, will only that make a difference? Because Iranians also, you can be quite sure, have a succession plan for Khamenei. If he goes, someone else will take over, and chances are that someone else will probably be more radical. It will be a more radicalized population. It will also be a more angry population, because many people who don't like Khamenei, or many people who don't like the Islamic revolutionary government and its restrictions, they will also be tied together now. They will also find a bond in the new nationalistic fervor, which is bound to rise. Iran is not a country that was artificially put together after the decline of after the end of the Ottoman Empire, which is the case with many other countries in the Middle East. When the Anglo-French power got together, drew up straight lines on the map and said, you are Saudi Arabia, you are Jordan, Syria is like this, etc., Lebanon is like this, etc., etc., Palestine is like this. There were no mandates on Iran. Unlike the Palestinian mandate or Lebanese mandate, there were no mandates on Iran. Iran is an ancient civilization going back almost 4,000 years BC, and a very strong country with a very strong nationalism, also very cohesive. So it's not as if just assassinating a leader will make the country fall apart and someone from outside could come in and take over the country and will be welcomed. What you could then see is a broken country, a failed state that holds the third largest oil reserves in the world besides much else. So that will be a very bad idea. It will also make Muslims angry all over the world. Not just the Shias in particular will be outraged if such a thing happened, but the Muslim populations across the world will be angry, and that will lead to disturbances in many parts of the world, especially in the Middle East. Remember, as I keep telling you, Iraq is a majority Shia country as well. That's the reason you now find the European allies in the Western alliance, not that Trump treats them with much respect, they've all been leaning now on the Americans and the Israelis to convince them that even the talk of assassination is a very bad idea, because ultimately you need somebody to negotiate with. That said, if you want a regime change, okay, you will not assassinate Khamenei, but you still want a regime change. There are limitations to forcing a regime change by just the use of air power. So I read an article in Foreign Affairs magazine by scholar Robert Pape, who says that if we look at the history of mass bombing missions since the First World War, and these include mass bombings of cities, destruction of cities, no country has ever been able to, no power has ever been able to bring about a regime change only through air attacks. No matter how much air superiority do you have, no matter how overwhelming you are bombing. What this needs is, he says, a hammer and anvil approach. This is the anvil, this is the hammer, this is where you keep what you want to flatten or what you want to turn, and then strike it like that. In military terms, hammer and anvil means having ground forces which corner the target and air power that demolishes it. That demolishes it. And airstrikes further cornered him. American intelligence told the rebels where he was, and that's how ground forces and airstrikes together finish the job. That is hammer and anvil. That is not going to be available in Iran. In fact, if the Iranians continue to be defiant and they keep on firing these missiles at Israel, and time runs out, pressure rises on the Americans, chances are that Trump will do the usual trick. I'm stealing the line from Wall Street Journal, which is Taco, Trump always chickens out. So what he's doing right now is psychological warfare. He's displaying American power to threaten the Iranians, and also at the outside saying, look, if nothing else, it's possible that I will use my B-2 bombers to put these heavy 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs or mountain buster bombs to take out the Fordo facility. And if that happens, then at least for now, the Iranian nuclear program will be set back by a very long time. That's the method that NATO, mainly the Americans, used in Muammar Gaddafi. They had people on the ground, rebel forces on the ground who cornered him. Then air power came and finished the job. That is something that is not going to happen in Iran, because the Israelis are not going to put boots on the ground. They can't even reach there to put boots on the ground, except their secret agents. And the Americans, even Trump, will think twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times, 10 times before putting any troops in Iran. In fact, you can be quite sure he will not be putting any troops in Iran. This is too large a country, too complex a country. It's much bigger than Iraq, by the way. And it's also not connected with other Middle Eastern countries, which will allow America a firm base and also a free movement into Iran. It's not going to happen. With the Middle East, oil has been a blessing. It's also been a curse. In fact, if we take the logic forward, when countries do not have proper systems, state structures, institutions, credible governments, then having resources becomes a curse. A country which is well endowed in institutions, with systems, with usually a democracy, say the US for example, has a lot of resources, but then those resources don't become a curse. It's when a country has messy systems and no institutions that resources become a curse. We've seen this happen with Venezuela as well. There's also a counter argument to this, that countries that have massive resources tend to become unstable because they are led for a long time by dictators. Why? Because dictators can use these resources to finance their dictatorial rule, either by bribing their population, giving them freebies, or by keeping the bigger powers happy. So resources become a curse if your politics is broken. And that is the case with many parts of the Middle East. We've seen that happen in Iraq. Before that, we saw that happen in Kuwait because the Iraqis came in that case to occupy Kuwait. And then we've been seeing this in Iran. In Iran's case, it goes back to 1949. In 1950, a military general took over as prime minister. He was General Ali Rezmara. The Shah was there, but the prime minister still had a fair bit of executive power. This is when Iran got caught in the Cold War. The Soviet Union on one side and the American British power on the other. They wanted control over the Iranian oil. British companies were producing oil in Iran. Now Ali Rezmara said he was going to nationalize the oil business. That is what led to a long period of intrigue where the British intelligence and the American intelligence, CIA, got together. All these documents have been declassified over time, so we know exactly what happened. As part of these intrigues, in March 1951, Ali Rezmara was assassinated. He was then succeeded by Mohammad Mossadegh, who was also a leftist or left of center. This is also the time that in Iran, the Communist Party, the Tudeh party, was becoming very strong. So he nationalized the oil business again, and the British were angry. That led to a further period of intrigue, at the end of which, in 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. He was overthrown and stayed in house arrest for a long time. In fact, until he died. In fact, it was on July 1, 1953, that the British Prime Minister okayed the plan to overthrow Mossadegh. On July 11, Eisenhower put his stamp of approval. It was an American-British operation. In fact, then the American and British power tried to establish Muhammad Raza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, in power as a credible leader by himself, because the Iranian society still had a political/democratic impulse. So he also appointed a bunch of prime ministers in his series, but in the course of time, all of them fell. The Shah became a dictator, a very rich dictator, because Iran by this time had become a very rich country. Iran already had very high levels of education and a very talented population. And Shah was valuing in that power. He was valuing in that power. He was helping Pakistan in our neighborhood, for example. He was also setting up joint ventures in India. So if you see the name of a company called Kudremukh Iron Ore Company, it was a joint venture that Shah of Iran set up in partnership with Mrs. Gandhi in India. Mrs. Gandhi also went along with it because she thought that it was one way for her to have the Iranians develop a vested interest in India to balance Pakistan. So in early mid-70s, Kudremukh Iron Ore Company was set up as a joint venture in Karnataka. The idea was to take out not very good quality iron ore and refine some of it in India, but ship the rest of it to Iran as export, where the Iranian government will convert this into steel. That joint venture died very soon because we know that by late 70s, Shah of Iran had started facing protests. He was getting into trouble. By early 1979, in fact, January 1979, he was gone. He was gone. He had gone into exile. And then Khomeini came back. This is when the Western powers were defeated in Iran. Of course, once Khomeini came back, the first victims of the revolution were the leftists who had waged this war against the Shah of Iran. They were the first ones to be either mass slaughtered or to be arrested and put in jail for a long time, where again either they died in jail or they were mass slaughtered again. And then you know the rest of the story, the ransacking of the American embassy and the hostage crisis. As we know, ultimately, it was the Iran crisis and the failure to get the hostages out, the failure of the operation to get the hostages out. The US lost a helicopter because of a sandstorm. That led to Jimmy Carter not being able to win a second term. It completely destroyed Jimmy Carter. This hopefully explains to you the complexity of a country called Iran. Now, to think that you can go and change things in Iran, you can turn the country inside out, you can bring a new regime, you can assassinate the Ayatollah, because even if you do, there will be an Ayatollah. That Ayatollah may or may not have political power today, may not be the supreme leader of Iran if you have your way, but there will still be an Ayatollah. There will still be the mosques and seminaries in Qom, because it is a big holy place for Shia Muslims. So all of that will not change. You are not able to change that. However, if you're just looking at regime change, see what's happened with regime change in the Middle East. Let's look at what's happened in the Middle East. And this starts with Saddam Hussein in 2003. That's what Macron referred to. In 2003, the Americans brought about a regime change in Iraq. That is something they had failed to do in the first Gulf War, because they did not go and occupy Baghdad. They were only using air power and were hoping that people of Iraq will rise in revolt and remove Saddam Hussein. They were not able to do it. In 2003, they occupied Baghdad, they got rid of Saddam Hussein. Finally, a democratic government came into being in Iraq and is still there. Elections take place in Iraq. But what happened? It became a self-goal for American power, for Western power, because Iran is majority Shia. Saddam Hussein was Sunni. His ruling elite was Sunni, the Tikriti Mafia as it was called, people from Mosul who formed his Praetorian Guard in a way. They were all Sunni. So this was the Sunni minority controlling a country which was majority Shia and which had launched a war on Iran. In a way, Saddam Hussein in Iraq was controlling the Shia power in the entire region, containing it in his own country, controlling it in his own country, but containing it in Iran as well. He was balancing Iran, but the Americans got rid of him because at that point everybody wanted regime change. And what happens when you have democracy? When you have democracy, majority wins. And Shias were the majority. And what happened to the Sunnis? The Sunnis, the generals in Saddam's army, many soldiers, many of the commanders in elite regiments, they are the ones who joined ISIS. And that's how they took control of Mosul. That's a story that all of us have heard about, we've read about, we watched documentaries on what happened. Also, this was around time that Al-Qaeda was dying. Osama bin Laden was declining. And what happened? It was Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda people who found refuge in Iraq, also in Iran, and there ultimately Al-Qaeda morphed into ISIS. In fact, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was based in Baghdad and grew out of there. This is a very good example, or maybe a very stark example, of how unintended consequences can follow you if you try to do radical things in regions you either don't understand very well or which are not ready for change like that. And Iraq stays in that situation right now. It still has an elected Shia majority government. Look at some of the others. Iraq was still fortunate. The country stayed together. But see Syria, Egypt, Libya. These were countries that were broken up during the Arab Spring. And that is when the democratic establishment in America was very excited. It was Obama's establishment. They were very excited. They were supporting these Arab Spring powers. Syria had a civil war for more than a decade. It led to so many people dying. Libya still remains divided into two. Egypt had its little dalliance with democracy, which brought in Muslim Brotherhood into power. Nobody liked it. Even the Egyptians didn't like it, so they got rid of him soon enough and went back to having a military dictator, a general as dictator. In fact, not just general. He's the only other field marshal in the world right now, besides, of course, the newly minted one, the newly self-minted one, who will be lunching with Donald Trump around time you are watching this. In fact, this will probably be the first time Trump will meet a field marshal, a serving field marshal, because Trump might have the largest, the most powerful military in the world, but he does not have a field marshal. And maybe it gives him an idea as well, and some of his people also get an extra star as a consequence. That's a joke, by the way. Look at Afghanistan. This was all the Middle East. The idea across the board was regime change. The idea across the board bombed. Every country was broken. This led to streams of refugees going to Western countries. This broke the politics of Europe, and that has ultimately led to the rise of parties of the hard right in European countries as well. That said, go right back to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the Americans and allies also came in not with the idea of catching Osama bin Laden or just catching Osama bin Laden or destroying Al-Qaeda, but of regime change. A regime was brought in, some elections were held, and what happened? One day that regime just disappeared, and the people to defeat whom America has spent tens of billions of dollars, maybe $1 trillion, maybe more. If you listen to Jack Ma, maybe more than a couple of $1 trillion. Americans went back, handing over the country to the same power, to the Taliban. So once again, these are countries which are not yet ready for this kind of change. Countries which do not have institutions, countries which do not have a history or tradition of peaceful transfer of power, countries which have been traditionally either monarchies or religious dictatorships. You have to be very, very reckless to be messing with them. And that is something that Trump has been hinting at.